Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We were actually expecting the Gemini to greet you, but apparently there is a little bit of mix-up with the computers. You know, I spend my time working with all these advanced technologies, and I have this recurring fear that one day I'm very old, and I'm sitting in some exotic location with my perfectly shaped Android that will help me through every aspect of daily life. We're sitting at maybe a resort of some kind, and we are both looking at that plug in the wall, wondering what to do, because we can't find all the adapters that we need. And that goes to show that even though we are in the world of very advanced science and very advanced computational models, sometimes the smallest and the most simple things can, keep us on edge a little bit. Perhaps it's just as well. This is a picture of from the production phase of the Gemini DK. And most people who see this image has that kind of feeling there is something a little eerie going on. There is something here that's not quite right. And this doesn't really get much better, does it? This is a picture I like very much. The woman here on your right is the artist who is responsible for building the exterior of the robotic face, Mrs. Okada. And she was working on the Android for quite a while. It actually takes about 9 months to produce an Android like this, which has some surprising connotations. And the face alone took more than half a year to build. And she was working on this face on a daily basis for half a year, poor woman. But that was her job. And there is this strange thing about robots that, contrary to ourselves, we begin understanding the robot existence from the inside out. With us, it's the exact opposite. We spend a lifetime doing that journey in the other direction, going deeper and deeper into ourselves and trying to understand why we behave the way we do, how we make sense of the world, and what our purpose here on this planet really is. But with androids, we understand them from the inside out, starting with a mechanical structure, building on top of that, in this case, something that is quite human in expression, and ending with what you see right here, my flexible friend. There is something strange about that word, robot, that perhaps is also what intrigued many of you to come tonight. I think that word in itself has the magical power to evoke worlds of imagination. In a sense, it embodies everything about our technological future. On one hand, we have the highest hope for all the science and all the technologies that we cannot exist without. On the other hand, we also know there is something a little bit scary. And we know that even though we make these magnificent advances that we do, there is sometimes a price to be paid. We have the most advanced communication tools ever imagined by mankind. We can communicate with more people faster at longer distances than ever before. And many of the things that we do on a daily basis must seem like magic to people just a couple of generations ago. But at the same time, sometimes we see people ending up alone in isolation. And it seems sometimes that we have forgotten what it is we try to communicate with all that fancy technology. And I think this is a good example of how both our hopes and our fears of the future can come together. And nowhere does it come together more clearly than in the face of the machine that really looks like us, the Android. So it has that kind of magical power to it that I like to explore a little bit with you. Imagine in a not very distant future that you're applying for a job and the person on the other side of the desk is actually a robot. It could happen. It could happen quite soon. Or imagine you see this in the street. Yeah. So there are two guys here. There's one guy, and only one guy, who is actually looking at the camera. All the others are occupied with other things. Imagine now that this one over here is already a little bit late for his next meeting, while the person here sitting is waiting for the end of office hours, and it's his job to go to the kindergarten and pick up the children and bring them back home safely through traffic. Imagine that. Or imagine that it would be an everyday occurrence that you could see people in the streets with their Android companions, drinking coffee or whatever they want to do. Because this is how they get through their everyday life. Not a PDA, a digital personal assistant in the palm of your hand, but someone who walks with you, who takes care of your appointments, guides you to where you're going to be next, and on the way, checks for traffic everywhere in the city. What if I told you that all of these scenarios can actually be real in 10 years from now? Would you believe me? Well, I do. Or imagine something like this. These two guys are sitting here contemplating what to do next. And then again, we go to the street. Whoa. And you see this picture again. This time, one of them is heading home, and the other one is waiting for a bus to take him to the airport across the world, perhaps to give a TED Talk on the other side of the globe. And that would be the Android. And it would be able to return home safely and report on whatever has been going on. Now, this is a major challenge, of course, in terms of the science that's needed for all of these things to happen. But again, if we look at all the things that are happening in the robotic world around the globe, this kind of crazy thinking can actually be the reality that our children will grow up with. Yeah, it's like that. So, is he talking now?
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
I'm ready for new adventures.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So let's take a journey and see what's in store for some of these new adventures. Take a little bit of a look at the greater picture, but also delving into a few technical details. I'm not going to be overly technical, but I will be around afterwards if some of you should have questions for that.
Here you can see my office, where I spend most of my time. People come and visit me, and we do various sorts of things.
You know, it still bugs me a little bit that his office is bigger than mine. It really does, for some strange reason. But one part of that reason, of course, is that his office is not a regular office. You can see there are cameras here. There are actually microphones on the table. And in fact, this is one part of an observation lab. And the other part looks like this. This is the control station from behind the scenes. From here, we can control the robot from a distance. We also record videos of whatever is going on inside the lab because we are really interested in how people interact with the robot. So we do a lot of video observation and a lot of analysis of all that material that comes out of it. And there's actually something missing, because usually when I'm in the lab, there should be some licorice on the table. I don't know how all you guys feel, but I think that experimental work without licorice is just like, it's a day without sunshine. So it's not good. You need that kind of stuff as well.
This picture is from an experiment. I was teaching a class of first-year students at the university.
It's a nice picture. I think it's a nice picture. This is one of the experiments that we did. We have done a number of experiments where we take the robot and put him into different kind of scenarios, typically places where I would otherwise be. So what you see here is a class of first-year students, and over here is the robot teaching. I was not even in the room at this point. I was sitting in another part of the building at my office, my smaller than his office, and I was working all the stuff from a distance. So you would have my voice on the PA system, you would have my slides on the wall, same as usual, but my bodily presence there was the robot. And also the room, of course, was then equipped with cameras and microphones, so I could sense what was going on in the room. In fact, there are people that I have only met through my body number 2. So that meant that during the lecture, I could also take questions, and I can react to people and say, "Yeah, you in the back of the road, in the blue shirt, please shut off Facebook for now and pay attention." That kind of stuff. You know, if you've ever seen a lecture hall from, you know, the back rows, you will know there's a lot of that going on. Now, this was just an experiment. And after that, people have been asking me a lot, can we please come and witness one of those lectures? We'd like to be part of that. The truth is, it took me 6 weeks to prepare this one lecture. So it's not something we do every now and then. Another very interesting thing about this lecture is that a number of the students did not realize that it was a robot teaching until the break. And that has caused a lot of bad jokes about students in Aalborg University. And it has also caused a number of very ill-advised humor on the capabilities of university teachers at Aalborg. Right? I mean, come on, really. And I mean, if you're sitting here in the audience looking at this, it's almost inconceivable. How can you sit there for 45 minutes and not understand that this is a machine, right? I think the truth here is not really that our students are more stupid than students everywhere else in the world. It's also not that my colleagues are very poor teachers. I think what happened was something completely different. We made the situation work. Now, if the situation works, if it's really about something, then there is something very deep in human nature that is eager to make stuff work. We want this to work. So for the majority of students, of course, many of them knew right away it was a robot, but for the majority of students, it didn't really matter. What mattered was the content, and this was a real lecture, one that I would give anyway, an introduction to human-centered informatics. So for them, it was, well, perhaps a little bit odd, but they didn't really pay much attention to that. They paid attention to what was happening. And this is a pattern that we have seen in many other experiments, including one where we used him for an oral examination. So one of my students would have prepared a small presentation and would give that in front of the teacher, that would be us, and in front of an external examiner, which was a real human. And when we looked at the videos afterwards, we could very clearly see that the markers for turn-taking, I'm done talking, it's your turn now, okay? Then typically we blink, were exactly the same. So for almost any of the experiments that we have done, we have seen that stuff that we know of in communicating with humans is transferable onto the Android world. We want to make the stuff work. We want to make the situation work. And that's also what happened here. And some of them actually stood there and said in the break, why are they taking pictures of the teacher today? It was strange. Here is another example of some of the other stuff that we do. This is more behind the scenes. So this is actually a screenshot of a computer program that will analyze facial expressions. And for this specific incident here, we put the robot in front of the cameras and ran him through some cycles. And the robot would then display different kinds of emotive states on his face. And the machine would assess to what extent this is neutral or angry or happy or sad or surprised or disgusted and that sort of thing. And you can also see here this graph here at the bottom shows the alternation between positive and negative emotions in the facial expressions. The way we did that is actually quite a funny story, because one of my young colleagues had, for some weeks, a quite special task. It was his job to make me very angry, and he was very good at that. And then he was filming me at the same time, which was, come on. It was also his job to make me very happy. Not so much a success, but hey, what can you expect? So, in effect, he would take me through the extremes of human emotions that I just mentioned. Happiness, surprise, sadness, joy, disgust, things like that. Videotaping my face. And then he had the pleasant task of going through some 40, 50,000 frames of films and picking out the best examples of this from all that material. So we took these expressions off my face and we reprogrammed the robot to express was the word I was looking for, exactly those emotions. And then we photographed that and put it online for questionnaires where people could assess what kind of emotion do you see on this face right now. Now, it turns out from this result that the positive emotions are quite easy for us to get through this kind of interface. We had some more difficulties with negative emotions like anger and disgust. And that is probably because this kind of android is built into a legacy of pleasing people. We don't want them to be overly negative in expression. One could argue, of course, that the original Gemini, the HI1, built on the face of Hiroshi Ishiguro, always looks a little angry. I think I'll have to agree with that. And that robot, by the way, has gone through a number of iterations. He's now running on version 4, which is the angriest android yet. And the people in the lab say, this time they really nailed him. This is exactly what he looks like. But we do have some issues with that. And this also illustrates an important aspect of this work. And that is to build the specification for the next generation of androids. What should they be capable of doing? What kind of internal and external mechanisms should we have in order to build robots that are even more convincing than this?
We do these experiments to understand how androids influence communication.
And here is an example, not from an experiment, but from something else that we do a lot, like demonstrations, which is essentially also what we're doing here tonight. That differs a little bit from what's going on in the experiments where there is a clear-cut purpose for having the android there. That's more like satisfying the curiosity of people, and that's also very important. We have learned a lot of this from this kind of demonstrations, and we have done a lot of these across the globe. In this case here, this is actually back home. Our lab is on top of a shopping mall, so we just moved downstairs and set up the robot. And look at the faces. See this guy over here? Little guy? He is the next generation of roboticists, for sure. And when he's old enough to come join us in the lab, we will be ready for him. What you can't see in this picture is what's going on with the robot. I forgot, that's him over there. Because prior to this photo, the android was sitting in something that looked a little bit like this. This is a loop of motion that goes on and on and on and on. And this is quite spooky to very young children, it turns out. One of my initial ideas was to take the android and put him in a kindergarten to play stories. You know, because he can just keep on going and going and going, and when the adults are done with that story for the 5th time today, and they need coffee or whatever they need, and they go inside for meetings, you could have an android still sitting there, telling the same story again and again. Like, I thought it was a wonderful idea. Hey, there's a market here, let's go for that. We never did this experiment. And the reason that we didn't do it is that we had these kind of very strong reactions from very young children when the robot is in automated state. So what's happening here in the picture is that we have shut down everything, which we can do after the break or something. So he's essentially sitting very still. And then we have a program that allows us to manipulate the actuators inside just one at a time. So we can have a little boy call out and say, "Good night, robot," doom, closes his eyes. Another one saying, "Good morning, robot," doom, opens his eyes again. Now they get it. This is like an action man. I understand what that is. I have one of those at home. Okay, this one is a little big, it's a little strange, it's old, little dense around the waist, but it's, you know, this is an action figure. I know what that's all about. And so this guy is very happy. But at the same time, look what's happening on the faces of the teenagers here. Sorry, that's not a teenager. This one over here. Whoa. So now they get really frustrated, right? What you still can't see in this picture is that 2 minutes before that, they were very happy. They thought it was all wonderful. But to them, at this point, this is simply too much. So they lean back, and they have that expression on their faces, "We don't want any more." Right? And what this is teaching us is that perhaps it's really, really difficult to build an android that will be functional both for very young people, for teenagers, and for the older guys. I mean, guys like these over here, they can handle anything, right? And it shows. I mean, it really shows. We got it. So, based on not only experiments, but also our observations of what's going on in these kinds of demonstrations, we sometimes change course a little bit in what we want to look for. And this kind of double experimentation is quite essential to the work in my lab. So at one point we have the very rigid, formalized observation studies with protocols and things to check out, and this is exactly how we do it. On the other hand, we also do this kind of more freestyle play, and the two inform each other. So sometimes when we're out in the field, we see things and say, hey, this is quite interesting. Let's take that back to the lab and examine in more detail. And sometimes it's the other way around. We sit in the lab and we see, oh, there's something going on here. Can we maybe test that somehow in the field? So we're trying to do a little bit of both. We have no good theory, no good strategy when we try to figure out which robot should go where. So what kind of interface would you have on which Android? This is a picture of my electronical half-sister, the Gemini F. And talking to myself here, this is actually one of the major problems that we're facing in human-robot interaction. We're quite certain that within the next few years we are going to see a lot of different kinds of robots very close to our lives. At work, at our homes, in institutions, wherever you go. But we still need to understand at a very detailed level what the implications are of interacting with these kinds of machines, and that's what we want to do. So let's look a little bit, take a short look at what's actually happening today. I chose this small video here as an example of what we call bioinspired robotics. And obviously this robot doesn't have very much other than a couple of eyeballs, but the movement is quite intricate. And this is an example of looking to nature, seeing how close to what's going on in the natural world can we actually get in our computer-generated world. So here's a strange cousin, obviously also intended to look fairly human. Why they put that blue light on his forehead, I simply cannot understand. I mean, that's a design flaw if you ever saw one, right? But, well, hey, there you go. Here is another one. There's actually many labs around the world trying to crack this problem. How do we make robots walk on two legs? And one of the most successful ones at the moment is this one, Petman, which was actually built for a completely different purpose. It was built to test out different kinds of fabric to wear and tear, often in the military world. But it turned out it was quite good at walking, so they kept going with that. Here is another example that I think is quite nice. This is from Germany. And this video here is in 12 times slow motion. See what happens with the hand of the robot? It catches the ball. There you go. There you go again. Wow. Oh, that's just showing off, isn't it? I mean, two balls at the same time, enough of that. Get out of here. Here is another example that I like quite much. You've probably all seen the quadrocopters flying around. What's interesting about this is not just that they are flying, but that they are communicating, they are doing stuff at the same time. So here they're flying in formation, in a 3D formation. It's a little bit difficult to see, but they're actually flying in eighths. And this is one of my favorite parts. So the robot is balancing this rod and throwing it to another robot that will catch it. And I can tell you right now that the equations necessary to do that are quite long. But these things are interesting indicators of what's happening in the industry around the world. So what we see here are robots that are built on biological principles, and we see robots that are communicating together, working together. So it's not just one robot. It's a number of robots that share information, then share solutions to problems that they are looking at. Maybe you think that quadrocopter thing here was just a little joke. Can you turn that down a little bit, Jay? Thank you. And then that's probably because you haven't seen this video. So this is an adult-size quadrocopter. And see what happens. It can fly a person. That's quite nice. And if you look carefully, you can see that the largest portion of this structure is actually the Pilates ball down here, which is a good thing to have because of that. Yeah. So, lots of things in store. This is a very portable, lightweight. Talking a little bit about the robots of tomorrow. What are we actually going to expect from that? And it's always a little bit, it's dangerous trying to predict, especially about the future, as Pete Hines said. So let's be careful about that. So what I'm not going to do is to give a very precise picture of what I think is going to happen, because I would probably be wrong. But what I will show you is a couple of examples of, or principles of, what I think is really going to change the world of robotics over the next couple of years. Here's the first one. Most robots today, including the DK, is controlled by one computer, and it has a very limited range. Now, this is going to change. And I say this based on a number of advances in batteries, fuel cells, in current state of robotics as well. We will be able to see people alongside their robots walking in very populated spaces, like the city of Copenhagen. And this is going to be changing the way that we think about robots in a really, really big way. And I think a perfect analogy to this is the difference between an old landline phone and a cell phone. That difference did not only change the way that we move, but it changed the entire way that we're thinking about communication. It's a completely different technology to be playing around with. So, even though robots today are quite limited in terms of range, what we are going to be seeing quite shortly are robots that have very long action ranges and can perform a lot of different kinds of activities on a very long range. Here is principle number 2. Because most robots today are pretty much stationary, they are also in general controlled by just one computer, so one-on-one, one computer, one robot. And that means that it's bound to whatever program is on that computer. This is also going to change in a very big way. So the next generation of these machines will be highly networked. And the implications of this are staggering. Imagine that I have a personal assistant like this, who is connected to 50 other androids moving around the same university where I live, or perhaps even in the same building. Now, that robot will not only take in perceptions from what's just around it, the same as we do, but it will also know what's going on in the 50 other locations of the building. And all of those will be moving, because they will be mobile. And they will be sharing information. And again, this is a really, really big game changer. The difference here is that between an old computer just sitting there and one that is connected to network. Today, it's almost inconceivable to think of a computer without also thinking about a network. This is going to happen in robotics, and it's going to happen really fast. Here's principle number 3. Because the robots of today are, by and large, stuck with just one computer running them, that also means that they're stuck with one kind of intelligence, and that is exactly what's on that one computer. But imagine if you have robots that are mobile and that are networked. That means that they will have access to a number of different kinds of intelligence sources, same as we do. So perhaps someone will have to come up with a kind of Facebook-like structure for robots, botnet, whatever. Someone will figure that out. But they will have very different ways of gathering information, sharing information, and using information in solving problems. And this is vastly important, not only in the personal sphere of the more personal robots, but also in a number of other applications, including trying to figure out traffic across a city. So we're going to see that as well.
Yes, Henrik, I'll be happy to summarize. The next generation of androids will be highly mobile, they will be networked, and they will rely on multiple sources of intelligence.
No one really puts that like a robot, huh? That's good to know. But, of course, there are some problems that we need to look into. Here's a predicament that I sometimes find myself in. We need to find solutions to this kind of problem. Many of us fly. That's okay. Flying with androids is a little bit tricky, I have to tell you. Well, for starters, there is this, irritating thing about turning all electronic devices off during taxi takes. It really slows down conversation quite a bit, doesn't it? And we need to fix that. There is something else, and that is that it's not a very dignified way of traveling because you have to go through this. Well, perhaps the days of dignified travel is simply over and done with after 9/11 and all of that. But still, I mean, this is kind of ridiculous. If you're an android today, not only can you not buy your own ticket, you have to travel as cabin luggage with a surname of Cello. But you also have to go through the odd-size scanner with the golf clubs and the strollers and the hunting rifles and everything else. And it's not a nice way to travel. And then we have this kind of problem. Sometimes we do this. You start wondering who's actually flying this plane. Because the entire crew would be standing around with their smartphones taking photos of the android. And although I'm sure he is a nice guy, I would actually prefer him out in the front of the plane where he's supposed to be doing something really important. But thinking about that, it might be a good thing, actually, that in just a few years, we will not need the pilots anymore, because the machines will fly themselves. And in fact, even in Europe, we are just a couple of years away from unstaffed passenger flights. How about that? Now, I can easily imagine a couple of mothers sitting on a plane debating whether or not it's ethically sound to have a robot pick up their child from school, or to have a robot help with the homework. I'd like to have that, actually. I can easily imagine these two women sitting there arguing that kind of story while on a plane that's flown by a robot. Yeah. There's a certain kind of irony, I think, to that. Another thing that's quite heavily on our minds is what kind of equipment should we put into these things? Now, someone actually suggested to me, why don't we put in thermal scanners in the robot at the lab? Because we can get a lot of information from this. So we're very interested in emotional communication. How do you communicate emotions? And having that kind of capability in the robot, having it to be able to read out temperature differences would be a nice thing, wouldn't it? Right? You can tell a lot of things from a person just by scanning the temperature. I said no to that because I don't want to have a robot that is very human in appearance while at the same time having super sensory, super perceptions, superhuman perceptions. But this is something that, of course, should be debated. And in the longer run, we might end up with that kind of situation. And you can start wondering, can you even have secrets anymore? Well, perhaps that's also done with because much of what we do today, we don't really keep secrets. We post them online instead and see what's happening. But someone said to me quite recently, well, it might be good to have 50 androids running around the building and taking care of stuff and communicating with each other, but I don't want any one of those in my bedroom. So I said to him, okay, where do you keep your mobile phone at night? In my bedroom. He says, yeah. Okay, so the interesting question here is, what is the difference, actually? And we need to think about that.
robot's voice and takes participants through a test. The goal is to assess how people engage with the robot, answering its questions, and in this case, making eye contact.
Jeg forsøger at aflæse de danske udtryk. Det er ikke så nemt.
They were seeking the acceptance of the android, which is normal at that stage because they've been with him for a while. They don't just see him as a machine.
So the longer they were in the room, the more they came to accept him as a being in the room.
Sure. And the uncanniness completely disappears.
Wow.
Yeah, room temperature. I know. That experiment was actually quite interesting because we have restricted the robot such that it could only make eye contact with one of the parties in the conversation. But they didn't know. And both of them would swear afterwards that they had made eye contact with the robot, and even that they would make some kind of secret language to give cues to what should I do next. The objective here was to reach some kind of decision. And we didn't do this because we want to trick people. But we do these kind of things in order to see what kind of reaction and what kind of response do we actually get when we place a robot in a live environment like that. And it's quite interesting for us to see that even though we know for a fact that you could not possibly have made eye contact with the robot because it could not look in your direction, we still are able to convey that feeling. And perhaps this is because deep down inside, we are wired in a way that we want to make things happen. We want to make things work. There's a deep part of our biology that requests that the situation should work. And we treat people in order for that to happen. And this, of course, is also why, when we talk to each other, we're not overly concerned with small flaws in grammar and things like that. So maybe you didn't get your nouns right or your verbs right. It doesn't really matter because the message gets across just the same. Right. So I'm getting close to the end here. But I have, of course, to address the issue of the uncanny. That spookiness that sometimes follows with all of this stuff. And I do admit, even though, yeah, there's another robot following me around here. Be used to it. Yeah, there you go, 5 minutes. How about that? Thank you. That's cute, isn't it? So even though for me, of course, this is an everyday thing, I do this every day, actually. I do understand that people can sometimes feel a little bit, what's happening here? And we've been playing around with this a little bit, playing around with the myth of the Frankenstein. So we did this for a photo shoot for an American journal, which we thought was funny. There's a fun fact, actually. I went over to the chemistry department and said, do you have something that looks a little bit like a home brewery? And they said, yeah. And what that resulted in was one of the chemists packed up a van and followed us on the shoot. So we have our own chemist running around doing special effects. That it was great. So, of course, you could see this kind of project as a weird kind of Frankenstein experiment. So we're trying to recreate life out of dead matter. Do we need to be really concerned about the implications of this? Could we possibly end up creating something that would be really terrifying for everybody? Now, personally, if people know me or know the DK here, the idea that he should actually pose a threat, it's a little far out. I mean, he's not really dangerous. But of course, the idea is still there, so we need to think about that. And it can get even worse. It can be something like this, that perhaps Dr. Frankenstein is not the human, but the robot, and we end up in the experimental slab there, which is perhaps even worse. Now, the beauty of the story of Frankenstein, I think, Mary Shelley's novel, is a very beautiful story about this creation that was made by this crazed doctor. Very eloquent, very well spoken. And this so-called monster hunts his creator to the end of the world and back for one purpose, for one reason only. He felt lonely. And his very point, his very message was to Dr. Frankenstein, you have to go back to the lab and make me one more, because I don't want to be lonely. And perhaps there is this beautiful side to the Frankenstein in robotics, that it could well be that the intelligent machines that we will be seeing shortly might not just prefer us for company, but might actually prefer each other. But my vision for the future is not really one or the other. It's not the monster scenarios with him on the slab or me on the slab, but rather a situation where people can work together, live together, and play together with their robots. And I think there is a lot for us in store. There are lots of things that we can learn from working with the androids.
Thank you very much for your attention. Do enjoy the rest of the evening. Bye-bye.